I found out my fiancé was cheating on me just a week before our dream wedding when I caught him mocking me. Now, I'm planning the ultimate revenge. I wasn't supposed to be on Caleb's laptop that day. He'd left it open on the kitchen counter before running out to pick up some last-minute groceries. I wasn't snooping, not intentionally at least. I just remembered I hadn't double-checked our honeymoon itinerary, and it seemed easier to use his laptop since it was already logged in. The browser was open to our reservation, a stunning beachfront villa in the Maldives. The photos alone felt like a dream. White sand beaches, turquoise waters, and private sunsets. I smiled, imagining us there, finally married and basking in the life we'd built together. And then I saw it. Another tab just a little farther down the row. It was marked with a heart emoji. My curiosity was piqued for just a moment. Maybe Caleb had planned a surprise for me. A sweet gesture, like the thoughtful gifts he used to leave me when we first started dating. A piece of jewelry? A love letter? I clicked on the tab, expecting to feel that familiar warmth. Instead, I felt my stomach drop. The tab opened to an email thread. I recognized Natalie's name immediately, Caleb's coworker. Married, kids, the kind of woman I'd never seen as a threat. At first, I tried to convince myself it wasn't what it looked like. But as my eyes scanned the messages, any hope I had of misunderstanding was dashed. They weren't just explicit. They were cruel. Line after line of their messages ripped through me, each one more humiliating than the last. They joked about me, about my quirks and habits, mocking things I thought Caleb loved about me. My excitement about the wedding? She's over the top, Natalie had written. I don't know how you put up with it. Caleb's response? Just biding my time. It felt like the ground beneath me was falling away. But the real gut punch came when I read their plans. They'd arranged to meet up during our honeymoon. Natalie and her husband, Daniel, were planning to coincidentally stay at the same resort in the Maldives. Caleb and Natalie had carefully coordinated their schedules, working around their spouses to make it happen. My dream honeymoon, the one I'd spent months meticulously planning, was their rendezvous point. I slammed the laptop shut, my hands trembling. My chest felt tight, like I couldn't breathe, and the walls of our home, my home, felt like they were closing in around me. Everything I thought I knew about Caleb, about us, had just crumbled in an instant. The man I was about to marry, the one I'd poured my heart into for years, wasn't just unfaithful, he was deceitful on a level I couldn't comprehend. How long had this been going on? How many times had he lied to my face, kissed me goodnight, and pretended everything was fine? I wanted to scream, cry, throw something. Anything to let out the pain and betrayal that were clawing at me. But as the initial wave of devastation passed, something else started to take its place. Anger. Hot, searing anger. He'd humiliated me, used me, lied to me. And for what? So he could sneak around with a married coworker? No, he wasn't getting away with this. Not without consequences. I didn't know what I was going to do yet, but I knew one thing for certain. Caleb's perfect little life was about to unravel, and I was going to be the one to pull the thread. The rage was suffocating. Every fiber of my being wanted to confront Caleb, to hurl the laptop at him the moment he walked through the door, to scream and demand an explanation for his lies. But deep down, I knew that's exactly what he'd expect me to do. He'd flash those wide, innocent eyes, craft some excuse, or twist the narrative until I started questioning myself. He was a master manipulator, and I wasn't about to hand him the upper hand. Confronting him immediately would be too impulsive, too clean. No, I wanted him to feel every ounce of the betrayal he'd inflicted on me. I wanted consequences, not just for him, but for Natalie too. They thought they were clever, but they had no idea what I was capable of. My first move was contacting Natalie's husband, Daniel. It didn't take long to find him. His Facebook profile was public and unassuming, his cover photo a picture-perfect family moment. Natalie, Daniel, and their 2 kids at a beach, everyone grinning ear to ear. The sheer contrast between that photo and the vile messages I'd read made my stomach turn. Still, I had to do it. I attached the screenshots to a private message, carefully explaining what I had discovered, and sent it before I could hesitate. As much as it hurt to drag someone else into this mess, Daniel deserved to know the truth. Just like I did. He called me that same night. His voice was low and hollow, barely masking the disbelief and heartbreak beneath it. I don't even know what to say, he stammered. I thought we were fine. I thought we were happy. The weight of his pain mirrored my own, and for the first time since discovering the affair, I didn't feel completely alone. Thank you for telling me, he said after a long pause. I wouldn't have known otherwise. By the end of the call, he'd resolved to file for divorce, his anger finally overtaking his sorrow. They're not walking away from this, he said, his voice firm now. I'll make sure of it. His determination lit something inside me. If he could take action, so could I. While Daniel made his plans, I started mine. The first step was logistical, quietly removing myself from Caleb's life. I rented a storage unit under my sister's name and began packing my belongings in secret. Every night, after Caleb left for work or a suspiciously long wedding errand, I boxed up my clothes, personal items, and anything else I couldn't bear to leave behind. Bit by bit, my presence in the house began to fade. Caleb, ever the self-centered fool, didn't seem to notice the gaps in the closet or the missing picture frames on the shelves. His confidence in his deceit was almost laughable. The engagement ring was the last thing to go. I placed it on the bathroom counter one morning, perfectly centered, where it couldn't be missed. I didn't leave a note. There was nothing more to say. The ring spoke for itself, a silent condemnation of his betrayal. Whatever he thought he'd get from me, whatever version of events he'd tried to spin, that tiny band of gold would stop him cold. It wasn't closure, but it was a statement. I was done, and there was no coming back. But leaving wasn't enough. Not after what I'd seen, the depths of their cruelty. Caleb and Natalie had been so smug, so brazen, believing they could play their games without consequence. They deserved more than just heartbreak. They deserved humiliation. Caleb's laptop became my weapon. I scoured his emails for more evidence, finding not only their affair but also messages where they mocked their coworkers and made unprofessional remarks about their clients. It was more than enough to spark chaos. I carefully drafted an email from Caleb's account, attaching screenshots of their incriminating exchanges, and scheduled it to send to their entire office, including their boss, at 9 a.m. Monday morning. A perfect way to start the week. As I hit schedule, a strange calm settled over me. It wasn't satisfaction, not yet. But it was a step. Caleb and Natalie thought they could keep everything neatly tucked away, hidden in the shadows of their respective lives. They thought they could make a fool of me. But the joke was on them now. I wasn't the heartbroken fiancé they thought I'd be. I was the storm they never saw coming. Exposing Caleb and Natalie for the frauds they were was almost too easy. Caleb had always been reckless with his passwords, so confident in his lies that he didn't even bother hiding them. I already had access to his email, a leftover piece of trust from when we were planning the wedding together. Now, that trust became my weapon. One evening, I sat down with a glass of wine and opened his inbox, scrolling through the most incriminating messages I'd found. With each email I reread, my anger solidified into cold, calculating resolve. This wasn't just about justice anymore, it was about taking back my power. I spent hours crafting the perfect email. Short, direct, devastating. I attached screenshots of their most explicit conversations, highlighting the dates and times that left no room for denial. Their messages weren't just about their affair. They were riddled with nasty remarks about their coworkers, complaints about their boss, and jokes that teetered on the edge of professional suicide. By the time I was done, the email was a bomb waiting to go off. I addressed it to their entire office, including their boss, and scheduled it to send at 9 a.m. sharp on Monday morning. Just as they were settling into the work week, Caleb and Natalie would face the fallout of their own arrogance. But I wasn't stopping there. One email wasn't enough. Caleb had built his entire professional reputation on being the dependable, golden employee. He loved to boast about how his boss always trusted him with the most sensitive projects. Natalie, on the other hand, was the social butterfly, the coworker everyone liked, the one who always had a joke or a kind word to share. Ruining their carefully curated images wasn't just satisfying, it was necessary. I took the screenshots and sent an anonymous tip to their HR department, laying out the affair in detail and citing the company's strict policies on workplace conduct. HR wasn't going to overlook something like this, especially not with evidence as damning as what I'd provided. With the digital destruction in place, I turned my attention to my own escape. I wasn't going to be there when Caleb's world collapsed. He didn't deserve to see my anger or hear my pain. I wanted him to walk into a cold, empty house and feel the weight of everything he'd lost all at once. I booked a last-minute moving truck under my sister's name and spent the weekend clearing out the last of my things. I didn't leave any traces, no post-it notes, no sentimental keepsakes. I even took the wedding dress I'd once loved, stuffing it into a garment bag and dropping it off at a donation center. That dress was meant for a life I no longer wanted, a future that no longer existed. The engagement ring was my final goodbye. I placed it on the bathroom counter, perfectly centered and gleaming under the harsh fluorescent light. I imagined Caleb coming home to find it, the realization dawning on him that I was gone for good. It was a small gesture, but it felt monumental. That ring was more than just a symbol of our broken engagement. It was a reminder of everything he'd thrown away. By the time Caleb returned home that evening, I was long gone. The house was eerily quiet, save for the sound of his keys jangling as he walked through the door. I wasn't there to see his reaction, but I pictured it vividly. He'd call out my name, expecting me to greet him like nothing was wrong. Then, he'd notice the missing furniture, the empty closet, and finally, the ring. I imagined the panic setting in, the weight of what he'd done crashing down on him. It wasn't about making him cry or beg for forgiveness. I didn't care about his tears. It was about showing him that he didn't control the narrative anymore. He'd made me feel small, insignificant, like a joke. But now? Now he was the one left in the ruins of a life he'd so carelessly destroyed. Monday morning, when the emails hit, those ruins would collapse entirely. And I wouldn't be there to pick up the pieces. The email landed in their inboxes at 9 a.m. sharp, just as planned. I wasn't there to see it unfold, but I could imagine the chaos as their coworkers opened it one by one. The attachments, the screenshots, the brutally clear timestamps, it was all there, laid bare for everyone to see. Caleb and Natalie couldn't explain it away. There were no misunderstandings, no missing context. It was an airtight case of infidelity and unprofessionalism that spread through the office faster than wildfire. By noon, Caleb's texts started flooding in. The first one was vague, almost casual. Hey, can we talk? There's been a misunderstanding. As if I'd accidentally outed his affair and not methodically planned it. By the third message, his tone had shifted to desperation. Please call me. I just need to explain. Explain? Explain how he'd mocked me to his mistress? How he'd planned to cheat on our honeymoon? The audacity made me laugh. By the fifth message, he was panicking. You've ruined my life. Are you happy now? Was I happy? I wasn't sure. But I wasn't sad either. Daniel, Natalie's husband, had no such uncertainty. It's all over the office, he told me when he called that afternoon. His voice was tinged with grim satisfaction. Caleb and Natalie were both fired today. Apparently, their boss was furious about the scandal. Something about company reputation and how clients might react if this got out. I could almost see his smirk through the phone. Natalie's been calling me nonstop, begging me not to go through with the divorce. She says she was just confused. He let out a bitter laugh. Confused enough to sleep with your fiancé for over a year? Hearing Daniel's resolve felt like validation. We'd both been dragged into a mess we didn't ask for, betrayed by people we trusted most. But unlike Caleb and Natalie, we weren't going to wallow in excuses. We were moving forward, separately, but in parallel. I ignored Caleb's calls. I wasn't interested in hearing him scramble to justify the unjustifiable. He'd spent over a year deceiving me, building a web of lies while pretending to plan a future with me. What could he possibly say now that would make any of it better? I didn't care about his apologies or his excuses, and I certainly didn't need his regret. Let him sit in the ruins of his carefully curated life. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that Caleb wasn't done trying to claw his way back into my life. He'd always been good at turning situations to his advantage, twisting the truth until it bent in his favor. I knew his texts and calls weren't just about apologies. They were about control. Caleb hated losing, and he hated losing me even more. Not because he loved me, but because I'd slipped out of his grasp. His final message that night confirmed it. I just want to talk. You can't ignore me forever. Oh, Caleb, I thought to myself, you'd be surprised how long I can ignore someone like you. It had been a few days since I'd left Caleb and unleashed the storm at his office. I was staying with my parents temporarily, trying to piece my life back together one box at a time. Their house wasn't home anymore. It was just a safe harbor while I figured out my next steps. My mom kept asking if I wanted to talk about what had happened, and my dad kept trying to distract me with bad jokes and offers to fix things I didn't need fixed. They meant well, but all I wanted was quiet. That quiet shattered one afternoon when I heard a knock at the door. I froze mid-unpack, a sweater dangling from my hands. Something about the knock felt too familiar. I crept to the door, peering through the peephole, and there he was, Caleb. He was standing on the porch with a bouquet of white roses, his face a strange mix of desperation and determination. My stomach sank. I considered ignoring him, but he knocked again, this time louder. My parents weren't home, and I didn't want him making a scene if they returned. With a deep breath, I opened the door just enough to step outside, blocking his view of the chaos inside. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice softer than I expected. There was a pleading edge to it, like he thought a little vulnerability might undo the damage he'd done. I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. "Talk about what?" I said, my voice flat. He held up the bouquet, like it was some kind of peace offering. "I know I messed up," he began, his eyes glossy with unshed tears. I didn't know how to tell you. It was a mistake, okay? I never meant to hurt you. I love you." I stared at him, unimpressed. He was trying so hard to look remorseful, his hair disheveled just enough to suggest sleepless nights, his voice trembling like he'd been rehearsing this apology for hours. But all I could think about were the messages I'd read, the cruel jokes he'd made about me, the plans he'd laid with Natalie to ruin our honeymoon. This wasn't love. This was desperation. He kept going, his words pouring out faster now, as if he could sense my patience running out. "It was never about you," he said, stepping closer. I was confused, and Natalie, she was there. But it didn't mean anything, I swear. "I can't lose you over a mistake like this. Please, just give me a chance to fix it." I tilted my head, letting the silence stretch between us. He fidgeted under my gaze, clutching the flowers like they might save him. When I finally spoke, my tone was ice cold. "A mistake is forgetting to take out the trash, Caleb. A mistake isn't carrying on an affair for over a year and mocking the person you claim to love." His face crumpled, and for a moment, I thought he might drop the bouquet. "I'll do anything," he said, his voice cracking. "Just tell me what to do, and I'll do it." I took a step forward and plucked the flowers from his hands, inspecting them briefly before handing them back. "This is too little, too late," I said, my voice unwavering. Without waiting for his response, I turned and walked back inside, shutting the door firmly behind me. For a long moment, I stood there, listening to the sound of his footsteps retreating down the driveway. Part of me expected him to yell, to bang on the door, to try one last time to win me over. But he didn't. When the sound of his car starting up finally broke the silence, I felt a strange mixture of relief and sadness. I knew I'd made the right choice, but that didn't make it any less painful. Caleb had been my future, or so I thought, and now he was nothing more than a painful lesson I'd carry with me. As I leaned against the door, letting the weight of the confrontation settle over me, I made a quiet promise to myself. I wouldn't let anyone make me feel this small again. The aftermath of Caleb and Natalie's implosion didn't stay confined to their workplace for long. Scandals have a way of growing legs, and this one sprinted through every social circle we were part of. Mutual friends, many of whom were supposed to attend the wedding, were caught completely off guard. I could see the shock in their text messages. "Is this true? I can't believe Caleb would do something like this. Are you okay?" Some sounded genuinely concerned, but others seemed more interested in gathering gossip. And then there were the ones who didn't reach out at all. At first, I thought it was because they were trying to respect my privacy. But as the days went on, I realized they were just avoiding the mess entirely. People don't like picking sides, even when the choice is obvious. The silence was louder than any words they could have said. I couldn't blame them, not entirely. Caleb's betrayal had created ripples that extended far beyond our relationship. It wasn't just about me and him anymore. It was about our shared connections, the carefully constructed social web we'd built over the years. People whispered about it at parties, speculated about how long the affair had been going on, and questioned what kind of person Caleb really was. The same man who once seemed so dependable and trustworthy was now the subject of endless debates. But as satisfying as it was to hear Caleb's name dragged through the mud, I couldn't escape the darker side of those whispers. Not all of them were about him. A few inevitably turned back on me. "How didn't she notice?" someone asked at a mutual friend's barbecue, loud enough for it to get back to me. I mean, Caleb was always a little too friendly with Natalie. She must have ignored the signs. Those words stung more than I wanted to admit. I replayed conversations in my head, moments that might have been red flags if I'd been looking harder. There was the time Caleb came home late from a work dinner, smelling like cheap perfume. Or the time he'd casually mentioned Natalie's name a little too often in passing. I'd written it all off as harmless, chalked it up to my own insecurities. But now those moments felt like warnings I'd failed to heed. Still, I refused to let their judgment break me. It wasn't my fault that Caleb had cheated. I wasn't the one who had lied, schemed, and betrayed someone I claimed to love. If people wanted to play armchair detectives and pick apart my choices, let them. I knew the truth, and I knew what I'd survived. But surviving didn't mean the rumors didn't hurt. At a dinner party a week after the fallout, one of Caleb's old college friends cornered me in the kitchen. He started with a sympathetic tone, asking how I was holding up. But then, as if he couldn't help himself, he added, "I always thought Caleb was too good for all this drama. Are you sure you didn't push him away?" It was like a slap to the face, but I refused to flinch. "You know what's funny?" I said, keeping my voice calm and measured. The only thing Caleb was too good at was lying to the people who trusted him. But sure, let's blame me for his year-long affair. I left him standing there, red-faced and stammering, while I returned to the table and ignored the knot tightening in my stomach. The hardest part wasn't the whispers or the rumors, it was the isolation. Caleb and I had shared so many connections that it felt like I couldn't escape his shadow. People who'd once been close to me were suddenly hesitant to talk, unsure of how to handle the fallout. It was like they were waiting for me to tell them how to feel, and when I didn't, they chose to fade into the background instead. I spent a lot of nights alone during that time, replaying everything in my mind and wondering if I should have handled it differently. Maybe if I'd confronted Caleb sooner, the betrayal wouldn't have spiraled so publicly. Maybe if I'd kept the fallout quieter, the whispers wouldn't have turned into full-blown speculation. But deep down, I knew those thoughts were useless. Caleb's choices had set this all in motion, not mine. As the weeks passed, I started to care less about what people were saying. Their opinions didn't change what had happened, and they didn't define me. Let them whisper. Let them speculate. I had bigger things to focus on, like building a life that didn't revolve around Caleb or the mess he'd left behind. It was late, and I'd just settled onto the couch with a book and a glass of wine when my phone lit up. At first, I didn't recognize the number, but something about it made me hesitate. Maybe it was curiosity or just the need for a distraction, but I picked up. "Hello," I said cautiously. There was a moment of silence before the voice on the other end came through. "It's Natalie." My stomach twisted. Of all the people I thought I'd hear from, she was at the bottom of the list. "What do you want?" I asked, my tone as cold as the knot forming in my chest. She hesitated, as if trying to gauge how much sympathy she could wring out of me. "You ruined my life," she said finally, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and tears. "Do you even realize what you've done?" I let out a sharp, bitter laugh. "What I've done?" I repeated, the disbelief and fury bubbling to the surface. "Are you serious right now?" "You ruined your own life, Natalie. I just made sure everyone else saw what was behind your little facade. You didn't have to go this far," she said, her voice breaking. "I lost my job, my husband is divorcing me, my kids." "Don't," I interrupted, my voice cutting through her excuses. "Don't you dare try to guilt me about your kids. You made this mess. You cheated on your husband, Natalie. You helped Caleb cheat on me. And now that it's blowing up in your face, you're looking for someone to blame? Grow up." The line was silent for a moment, and I imagined her sitting there, stunned. She wasn't used to people calling her out, was she? People like Natalie always got away with things because they knew how to charm, how to manipulate. But I wasn't playing her game. "I didn't mean for it to get this bad," she muttered finally, her voice smaller now. "I didn't think." "No," I snapped, cutting her off again. You didn't think. You didn't think about your husband, your kids, or me. And now you're surprised that there are consequences? That's on you, Natalie." She tried to stammer out a response, but I was done. "We're finished here," I said, my voice cold. Before she could say another word, I hung up and immediately blocked her number. For a moment, I just sat there, staring at the phone in my hand. The conversation left a strange mix of emotions swirling inside me: satisfaction, anger, a tinge of sadness. I wasn't sorry for what I'd done. Not for a second. Natalie and Caleb deserved every ounce of fallout that had come their way. But hearing her voice, hearing her attempt to turn the blame on me, reminded me just how deep her selfishness ran. I finished the rest of my wine in one long sip and set the glass down with more force than I meant to. The call had rattled me, but it hadn't changed anything. I wasn't interested in Natalie's excuses or her regrets. She could wallow in the mess she'd created, just like Caleb. Their actions had destroyed lives, not just mine and Daniel's, but their own families too. If they couldn't handle the consequences, that was their problem, not mine. For the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of closure. Natalie's call wasn't an apology, it was a confirmation. She was grasping at straws, trying to salvage the wreckage of her life, but I wasn't going to let her drag me down with her. I'd done what I needed to do to protect myself, and I wasn't about to start feeling guilty now. As I went to bed that night, I allowed myself a small smile. Natalie could blame me all she wanted, but deep down I knew the truth. I wasn't the one who ruined her life. She did that all on her own. Moving forward felt like learning to breathe again after being underwater for too long. Every step toward rebuilding my life was slow, deliberate, and exhausting. Therapy became my anchor. At first, I hated it, sitting across from a stranger, rehashing all the ways Caleb and Natalie had broken me, dissecting every moment of self-doubt and misplaced trust. But week by week, the session started to feel less like a chore and more like a release. My therapist didn't sugarcoat anything. Healing isn't about erasing what happened, she told me once. It's about learning how to carry it without letting it crush you. Some days, the weight felt manageable. Other days, it crushed me all over again. The betrayal wasn't just an emotional wound. It was a question mark hanging over everything I thought I knew about myself. Why didn't I see the signs? Could I have stopped it sooner? Was I too trusting, too naive? The humiliation of being blindsided, the memory of Caleb and Natalie mocking me behind my back, still stung like an open wound. Those were the hardest days, the ones where I couldn't shake the feeling that their actions had left a permanent mark on me. To fight that weight, I threw myself into rediscovering the parts of me that Caleb had slowly smothered. During our relationship, I'd sacrificed so much of my time and energy for him. My hobbies had been abandoned, my goals put on hold, my social life narrowed to what fit into his world. Now, I was taking it all back. I picked up painting again, splashing colors onto canvas, without caring if the results were any good. I started running, letting the steady rhythm of my footsteps drown out the noise in my head. I even joined a book club, a small, simple commitment that reminded me how much I'd missed being around people who genuinely cared about me. My friendships became a lifeline. The ones who stuck by me during the fallout, the ones who never doubted me or made me feel like Caleb's betrayal was my fault, proved their worth in ways I'd never forget. We started meeting up regularly, whether for coffee, movie nights, or just long walks where I could vent without fear of judgment. For the first time in years, I felt like I was surrounded by people who valued me for who I was, not for what I could give them. But as much as I tried to rebuild, trust was another story. Every interaction felt laced with doubt, every smile or compliment hiding a potential betrayal. I found myself questioning people's intentions, wondering if their kindness was genuine, or if it came with strings attached. Dating felt impossible. The idea of opening myself up to someone new was like staring into a bottomless pit. How could I let anyone in when Caleb, the person I'd planned to spend my life with, had so thoroughly shattered my belief in love? One afternoon, my therapist asked me, "Do you think you'll ever be able to trust again?" The question lingered, heavy and unanswered, as I stared at the floor. "I don't know," I admitted. "Maybe not completely." She nodded thoughtfully. "And that's okay. Trust isn't about being blind to the possibility of pain. It's about choosing to believe that the risk is worth it. And that takes time. It felt like the one thing I had plenty of and not enough of at the same time. I knew healing wasn't linear, that some days I'd feel strong, and other days I'd feel like I was back at square one. But the further I got from the wreckage Caleb and Natalie had left behind, the more I started to see glimpses of a future that didn't revolve around them. It wasn't about forgetting what had happened. It was about proving to myself that I could survive it. As I stood in front of a blank canvas one evening, brush in hand, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe I wasn't fully healed yet. Maybe I never would be. But in that moment, surrounded by the mess of paint splatters and half-finished projects, I felt something I hadn't in a long time: possibility. And for now, that was enough. Months had passed since I left Caleb, and in that time, I'd done everything I could to put him and the chaos he caused behind me. Therapy was helping. My hobbies were filling the empty spaces he'd left. Even the whispers of the betrayal, the judgment from some and support from others, had started to fade. But as much progress as I'd made, there were still days when the memory of him crept in, uninvited. I thought about the version of Caleb I'd loved, the man I believed in before I found out he was nothing but a facade. Then, one rainy afternoon, fate decided to throw him back into my life. I was standing in line at my favorite coffee shop, scrolling absent-mindedly through my phone, when I heard his voice. "Hey." Just that one word, so casual, like he hadn't shattered my life. I looked up, and there he was, standing at the end of the counter, with a to-go cup in his hand. "Caleb." He looked rough. His hair was unkempt, his usual put-together appearance replaced with dark circles under his eyes and a shadow of stubble on his jaw. He wasn't the same polished man who had once charmed everyone in the room. No, this Caleb looked like someone who had finally felt the weight of his actions. "Hi," I said flatly, refusing to show even a flicker of emotion. He hesitated, glancing down at his coffee like it might give him the courage to keep talking. "You look good," he said finally, his voice uncertain. "How have you been?" I blinked at him, incredulous. How have I been? The question felt almost laughable. After everything he'd put me through, he wanted small talk? "What do you want, Caleb's?" I asked, my tone sharp enough to make him flinch. He shifted awkwardly, running a hand through his disheveled hair. I wanted to say I'm sorry," he said, his voice quiet. "For everything. I know I screwed up. I know I hurt you." For a moment, I stared at him, trying to figure out if he was genuinely remorseful or just fishing for some form of absolution. Either way, it didn't matter. His apology, whatever it was worth, didn't change anything. "There's nothing left to say," I told him firmly, my voice devoid of the anger or heartbreak I might have felt months ago. "I've moved on, Caleb. You should too." He opened his mouth like he wanted to argue, but then he seemed to think better of it. He nodded slowly, his shoulders slumping. "Yeah," he said finally. "Okay." I walked past him without another word, the sound of the doorbell jingling behind me as I stepped out into the rain. I didn't look back, and he didn't follow me. As I made my way home, a strange mix of emotions settled over me. There was satisfaction, a quiet sense of triumph that I had taken control of the situation, that I hadn't let him pull me back into his web. But there was sadness too. Sadness for what I'd lost, for the version of Caleb I'd once loved, for the future I'd envisioned before it all came crashing down. It wasn't closure, not entirely, but it was enough. Enough to remind me that I'd chosen myself, that I was stronger than the person who had let him chip away at me for so long. And as I stepped into my apartment, the rain still dripping from my coat, I realized something else. I didn't need Caleb to apologize, or regret, or even suffer. I just needed him to stay gone.